Ponytails. Read by Scribbler.
Always, heaven is a place nearby, so I won't be so far away. And if you try and look for me, maybe you'll find me someday. Heaven is a place nearby, so there's no need to say goodbye. I will ask you not to cry, I'll always be by your side.
But You Surpass Them All by Pascoete.
What you doing, sis?
Applejack jumped and whipped her head around, sending her trowel flying against the side of the barn. Apple Bloom, don't sneak up on me like that. She took a few steps through the flower bed to retrieve it.
Sorry, AJ.
Apple Bloom said, lowering her head as she backed away. Applejack tossed the trowel down with her pruners and smiled warmly. It's okay. I'm out here tending the garden and picking flowers. Don't you remember? Apple Bloom blinked once, then opened her eyes wide and gasped,
Oh, it's already here?
She hopped up and down and donned a blissful smile. Yup, Applejack replied. Mother's Day. You want to help? In reply, she received a vigorous nod. Pick out a few of these hyacinths. They're her favourite. Apple Bloom leaped between the rows of blossoms. After nosing through several of the deep green stems, she gravitated towards one particularly showy stalk, graced with a dozen pastel blue flowers.
This one's beautiful. It's the best one in the bunch. Can I pick it?
Applejack chuckled, giving her head a little shake. Think now, Apple Bloom. That flower opened a few days ago, so it'll only be good for a few more. Bending her head low to make her own choice, she settled on a tall one, its half-open petals revealing a bright pink that still lay mostly concealed within its waxy buds. Look at this one. It'll be freshly opened by this afternoon. It's a great colour and size, and it'll last another week yet. She grasped a pair of pruners in her teeth and snipped the stem off neatly at an angle near the ground. Tell you what, my spare pruners are in the barn. Go get 'em and cut me some hydrangeas from the bush over yonder, she said, pointing at a blue cascade growing against a dead oak tree. Those would fit in the centre of the vase nicely. Swishing her tail eagerly, Apple Bloom rushed into the barn and back out to the shrub. Applejack could see her concentrating as she selected the finest clusters and clipped them off, catching them in a basket. Applejack bent down as she spotted a few more flowers to cut. Glad we had a long winter for a change. Unusual to have hyacinths still blooming in May. Don't often get 'em for Mother's Day. By the time Applejack had amassed a sizable bundle, Apple Bloom had returned with nearly a full basket, her chest puffed out.
How'd I do?
She asked, her eyes twinkling. Perfect. Applejack tossed her own flowers into her sister's basket. Now, how about you take the whole lot and put 'em in some water? You always make great arrangements. Use the good vase that's in the back of the cupboard. Applejack picked up her pruners and trowel, leading the way back down to the barn door to put her tools away. You know, you've got a real knack for that stuff. Building and decorating and getting everything just so, she added. But when she looked behind her, Apple Bloom had already galloped off to the house with her fragrant cargo. One of these days you'll figure it out. She gave a knowing chuckle, then stowed her gardening implements and came back outside into the grassy meadow surrounding her flower beds. The light breeze hinted at the first warmth of the day that was eroding the slight morning chill, and the green blades beckoned to her with their sparkling adornment of dew. Accepting their invitation, she lay down and closed her eyes, holding her head up high to take in a deep breath of the nectar-scented air. feel the sun's gentle radiance on her cheeks, and hear the lilting birdsong all around her. Knotted muscles gradually relaxed and breathing slowed. Applejack let out a prolonged sigh, feeling her body sink into the earthy carpet of grass. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 5 minutes, she snapped out of her reverie, propping up a hoof to rise and brushing away a strand of mane that tickled her nose. She indulged for one last moment, watching a pair of butterflies dance on the wind, then smiled as she trotted off to the house to wash up for her trip to town. Applejack walked into Ponyville's bustling marketplace around noon and headed straight for the vegetable stands. As she neared the canvas awnings and wooden carts, Twilight Sparkle caught sight of her and vigorously waved a hoof. "Hi, Applejack. It's rare to see you here without a load of apples in tow. Is your wagon broken again?" Twilight frowned as she studied her friend's face. "I can just teleport it here if you need any help. It's big, but I think I could do it."
"No, Sugar Cube,"
replied Applejack.
"I'm buying today. Thank you kindly for the offer, though."
She swung her nose towards the bouquet cascading over the brim of her saddlebag.
"I've got a special picnic to arrange today."
"Oh, yeah, this is Mother's Day. This is the first one I've spent in Ponyville. Pinky's told me all about your get-togethers. They sound fun." Twilight cocked her head and donned a friendly smile.
"Yeah, a typical apple clam thing."
"Like my first day in town," Twilight said, nodding. "How could I forget? You didn't even know me and treated me like family." Her ears pricked straight up, and she leaned in enough to convince Applejack she was about to receive an impromptu hug.
Yeah, well..."
She backed off, her toothy grin and knit brow fighting for control of her face.
"Now, of course we would, Sugar Cube."
Twilight's eyes brightened a bit more as she let out a small gasp. "It's lunchtime. Why don't you join me at the cafe?" After shifting her weight back and forth a few times, Applejack finally answered.
"Sure, why not? We kinda do a late lunch, early dinner thing, so I could have a small snack, and I've got the time."
Squealing in delight, Twilight led the way to an empty table nearby and helped her friend carefully set her saddlebag and its colourful contents in one of the vacant chairs. She sat down and glanced up at the waitress that had materialised beside her. "Oh, I'll have a marigold salad and an iced tea, please."
"Very good. And for you, Mom?"
Applejack stared off into the distance and drummed a hoof on the tabletop.
"Mom?"
Shaking her head for a moment, Applejack dropped into her seat.
"Oh, sorry. Just give me a small order of carrots and a glass of water, please."
"So, like I said, this is my first Mother's Day outside of Canterlot." Twilight watched until Applejack's mind had fully returned to the present. "Of course, I was away at school the last few years as well, but at least in the same city. I sent Mom a letter and a gift yesterday to wish her well." Applejack nodded as the waitress returned with her drinks, then looked off towards the clouds again, a hind leg fidgeting against her chair. Clearing her throat, but getting no reaction, Twilight sipped at her tea until her eyes were drawn back to the flowers. "I've never met your mother, Applejack," she said. "Tell me about her." Applejack's face immediately brightened, and she sat up straight, a twinkle reigniting in her eye.
"I don't see as much of her as I should, but we make the time we have count. We have our Mother's Day picnic every year. Apple Bloom's already helping me with the flowers."
An ear flicked once as her head bounced in a silent snicker.
"I remember once, when Apple Bloom was just a toddler. She saw something or other on top of the fridge, and she wanted it. Cookie or a toy or something. Anyhow, I come home from school, and as soon as I walk in the door, I hear a scream. I go running to see what's wrong, but before I can get there, I hear Mom laughing so hard that she's almost in tears."
She leaned forward to take a drink, then shook her head as she broke into a broad grin.
Cellophane had stacked up her building blocks in a chair and made herself some stairs. She was perched at the top with whatever it was she'd gotten, and Mom was down below, laughing her head off and reaching up to carry her down.
Twilight had to join in with the infectious chuckling, and even the waitress had to smile as she brought their food. "Already? At that age?"
"Yeah,"
Applejack blurted, raising her hooves to her cheeks.
You know what else? That thing was hard to take apart.
She failed at her next few attempts to continue her story, as her mirth kept her breathless. Finally, she regained her composure enough to speak.
Mom told me to put the blocks away while she put Apple Bloom down for a nap. I figured I'd just give it a good kick and it'd all come crashing down. But that thing was strong. I just knocked it over and it broke into a few big chunks. She had 'em interlocked somehow, and it was like solving a puzzle to get all the blocks separated. Little Philly knew what she was doing.
Resting her chin on her hoof, Applejack got a far-off, nostalgic look in her eyes as her warm smile lingered. She breathed in deeply and let out a long sigh.
Sometimes I wonder if she's ever going to see it. Stubborn thing.
She popped a few carrot slices in her mouth and crunched away. When she had finally finished chewing a mouthful of salad, Twilight remarked, "Well, she is an apple." A half-lidded eye glared pointedly back at her, almost making her choke on her tea. Twilight coughed and dabbed a napkin at the chin below her mischievous grin. "I'm sorry. She'll get it. Most ponies take a while to figure out their talents. It's nothing to worry about."
I ain't worried, Sugar Cube. She'll be fine. Mom must have looked at me the same way when I was young.
A reflective smile returned to her face as her eyes glittered in the noonday brightness. "What are you in town to buy? A gift?" Twilight asked, before levitating another forkful of golden petals and greens.
Food. I need the fixings for our dinner.
Applejack's gaze returned to the horizon while her hoof continued tapping against the chair leg. Her fork pausing in mid-air, Twilight gaped for a moment before returning a quizzical look. "But you grow so much on your farm. Why do you need to buy food?"
Change of pace. Of course, we all love a good homegrown meal, but it's nice to have something different once in a while that we don't have at the farm. Special occasions a good time for that,
replied Applejack, as she scooped up the last of her carrots and downed her drink.
Well, I've still got a lot to do, and only a few hours left. If you'll excuse me.
As Applejack pulled a few bits out of her saddlebag to cover the tab, Twilight stuffed the remnants of her salad into her mouth.
Apple!
After some hasty chewing and a pronounced gulp, Twilight levitated a few of her own coins onto the table and rose to follow Applejack. "I'd like to help, if I could."
I got it covered, but you're free to take along if you like. I don't mind the company.
Applejack straightened her hat, smiled, and motioned her head toward the market stalls. Eyeing Applejack's already overloaded saddlebags, Twilight floated them up and onto her friend's back and offered, "I can help you carry things. It doesn't look like you have much room left."
That'd be mighty kind of you, Sugar Cube. First thing I need is some squash.
Applejack led the way to a horseshoe-shaped arrangement of wagons filled to the brim with a colourful array of wares. Produce of various shapes and sizes endured her calculating stare and the judgmental thump of her practiced hoof. After poking and prodding for a good 10 minutes, she finally approached the proprietor.
"Ready, Joe? How much for 4 zucchinis and a 4 summer squash? Oh, and one of those eggplants, too."
She put her hoof on the counter and leaned forward, her eyes narrowed into a conspiratorial squint.
8 bits. It says on the sign.
Her hoof waved around to waft his words away.
Yeah, we all know how this works. What's the real price? 8 bits. It says on the sign.
He repeated, more slowly this time.
I know for a fact you gave Daisy a better price not 3 days ago,
said Applejack, a triumphant smile creeping onto her face.
That was 3 days ago. Things change.
Deciding he wasn't going to make any more progress, Radicchio headed back for his stool.
It's for my mother,
Applejack growled through gritted teeth.
Then your mother can come here and pay 8 bits,
he barked, plopping down on his seat. Maybe, Twilight said, as she saw a completely unfamiliar fire smouldering behind her friend's eyes. Applejack gaped at him in silence for a moment before she could cough up the first words lodged in her throat.
"You, don't you even!"
she shouted, drawing the stares of the nearby townsponys as she searched for a different argument to pursue.
"If you will recall, I gave you a price cut on your corn last year when you needed it."
Radicchio looked back and forth between Applejack and Twilight a few times before his expression softened.
5 bits. Best I can do. Done,
Applejack said. though her anger didn't fade away entirely. She left her money on the counter and deposited her choice of produce into Twilight's saddlebag. Stalking out of the stall, she muttered under her breath, "Of all the nerve, you try and do some pony a favour."
It's all right, Applejack. He was just driving a hard bargain. I don't think he meant anything by it.
Twilight tried to offer any reassurance, her ears folded back. "It's not that. He only comes round a couple of times a year, so I barely know him. He doesn't know any better. It's just... Here we are." Steering Twilight towards another wagon containing an interesting assortment of small potted plants, Applejack called out to the mare reading a newspaper next to it. "Howdy, Rosemary. How are the falls doing?" Rosemary folded her paper, tucked it away under her foreleg, and gave Applejack a friendly wave.
Just as much trouble as always. You look off. What's wrong?
Her jaw still set, Applejack shook her head and waved off Rosemary's concerns. "It's nothing. Don't worry about it." Rosemary nodded, giving a tight-lipped smile, and retrieved a small bag from underneath the cart.
I thought you'd be in by today. I've got your usuals already picked out. Sweet basil, oregano, thyme, garlic, parsley, and some coarse-ground black pepper. I'll also throw in some of the portobello mushrooms and spinach from my personal stash," she added, winking. "I thought they blend in well."
That's a great idea. I'll have to add that to the recipe when I get back home.
Her eyes rolled upwards as she added the suggestion to her mental file. Then she gave a curt nod once it had been committed to memory.
4 bits.
As she slumped back against her wagon, Rosemary plucked a leaf from a nearby pot of her namesake herb and chewed on it absent-mindedly.
You're barely making cost on that, Sugar Cube. 7 bits,
responded Applejack as she rolled the top of the paper sack down and added it to Twilight's saddlebag.
Nope. 4.
Want to make it 8?
Applejack counted, her smile belying her icy stare. Rosemary shook her head and sighed.
Fine, 7. You try to earn an honest living, and look where it gets you.
Yup, you poor thing,
Applejack quipped, giving Rosemary a hearty clap on the shoulder and pouring a small pile of bits out into a coin pouch.
I'll see you around.
Okay, say hello to the family for me.
Will do, Applejack waved, and then was back out among the crowds. Are you still mad? Twilight asked, rushing to keep up so she could see her friend's face. Don't let it ruin your day. Watching her out of the corner of her eye, Applejack forced a smile and quickened her pace.
It's fine, Sugar Cube. Here, I need a parcel of tomatoes.
She stopped at a cart overflowing with vines, and the sight of its owner relaxed her demeanour. Circling around to the back, she grinned and allowed the mare to nuzzle her neck.
Hot house, good to see you again. I need a couple of dozen of your ripest.
Picked them just this morning, AJ. Making your usual?
Hothouse asked as she patted Applejack on the shoulder.
Sure I am. Mom's always liked our Italian.
Hothouse walked over to one corner of her wagon.
Take a couple of these vines, deep red, and they grow over near my sweet onion patch. They take on a bit of the flavour.
Smiling and licking her lips, Applejack said,
Sounds good. How much do I owe you?
Hothouse closed her eyes and beamed.
For you, AJ, no charge.
Her ears pricked up as Applejack averted her eyes and smiled shyly.
That's sweet of you, but I can't let you put yourself out. 10 bits, and I won't take no for an answer, she said, already placing a stack of coins on the cash box. I'll stop and talk to you later this week, but I gotta be about my business today.
She gathered up her tomatoes and lowered them carefully into Twilight's pouch.
I know, AJ. Take care.
They waved goodbye, and Applejack trotted out of the market square toward the ornate storefronts lining the main street. Feeling better? Twilight asked, trying to keep up. She was awfully sweet. Applejack closed her eyes for a moment, nodded sharply, and slowed to a walk, turning her head to smile at Twilight.
Yeah, I'm fine. Hothouse and Rosemary are farmers like me. We get along because we understand each other. Take this next stop for a change. Ponies here wouldn't know me from some random stranger. They deal with a customer base that's a little more highbrow.
A bronze bell tinkled as she pushed open the door to Ponyville Beverage Bread and Cheese and sampled the rich, enticing aroma that billowed out. Inside, shiny metal shelves displayed a cornucopia of exotic wares, fancy packaging, ostentatious decoration, and hoof-lettered signs. Twilight followed as Applejack wound her way through the aisles, picking out the few remaining items she needed. A small vial of balsamic vinegar, a little cruet of olive oil, a block of Romaneo cheese, a crusty baguette, and a bottle of sparkling grape juice. Applejack carried her purchases to the front counter, where Unicorn Mare tallied them up in a small ledger. "That comes to 32 bits. Let's see if we can do all these for 25, Applejack said, donning her best haggler's smile. "Let's see even we can do this all for 25, Applejack said, donning her best haggler's smile. "If'n," emphasized the unicorn with a pointed stare. "We could, then perhaps, but I'm afraid our prices are quite firm." "Oh," replied Applejack, and she looked away and hung her head. All right then," she added in a quiet voice, as her ears drooped. She counted out her money, leaving one lonely coin at the bottom of her pouch. Her jaw set, Twilight glared daggers at the cashier while levitating the last of Applejack's groceries into her bag. Once they had gotten back outside, she grumbled, "I hope you know she's not representative of all unicorns." "Course not, Sugar Cube. It takes all types. No harm done." Applejack turned towards Carousel Boutique. "One last thing to do before I get to fixing dinner." She had barely gotten a few paces before Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy came to a landing in the roadway in front of her.
Everything's set, Dash declared. It's gonna be perfect. She jumped back up into a hover and pumped a triumphant hoof. All the clouds are cleared except for one little one that'll give you a bit of shade. And that light breeze from this morning will be back. Oh, hi there, Twilight. Twilight gave a perfunctory smile and a little wave.
Oh,
Fluttershy added, bouncing on her hooves as her eyes brightened.
I remember you once said you like wren calls, so I got a couple of my wrens to help out, if that's okay.
She winced as she looked up at Applejack, but broke into a smile when she saw her friend's reaction.
They're going to sing for you during your picnic.
She held her head up as high as she dared and beamed at Applejack.
That'll be wonderful. Thanks, y'all.
Her eyes teared up as Applejack gave both the new arrivals a huge smile.
I was going to get a mockingbird,
Fluttershy said,
so you could have any song you liked, but I've never heard you mention anything other than wrens.
Oh, no,
Applejack replied, shaking her head emphatically.
It's never quite the same as the real thing. You see, I was about Apple Bloom's age when a couple of wrens built a nest right outside my window. They woke me up nearly every morning. I begged Mom to let me shoo 'em away. She told me to leave 'em be, that I'd learn to appreciate 'em someday. They came back and made a new nest every year. When I got a bit older, they made a great alarm clock. It was nice hearing that music first thing, year after year, and just in time to wake me for school. Now, I get up before they do, and I miss it. Mom knew. She knew all along.
She grinned at Fluttershy, who shrank away and blushed.
I love hearing wren song. It's something Mom and I shared. She'll love it too.
We just wanted to make this day one to remember, Dash said, while rubbing a hoof on the back of her neck. Come on, Fluttershy. We shouldn't hold her up anymore.
Thank y'all again. This means a lot,
Applejack said, as Rainbow Dash spread her wings. Fluttershy, hissed Rainbow out of the corner of her mouth. Fluttershy! She poked a hoof at Fluttershy, who was startled out of her thoughts and looked up as if she'd been caught cheating on a test. Come on, Dash reiterated, jerking her head skyward.
Oh, yes, see you later, Applejack. You too, Twilight.
She flashed a feeble smile and flapped her way behind Rainbow Dash.
That was awfully sweet of them,
remarked Applejack, as she resumed her journey to Rarity's shop. It sure was. Wow, Everpony's really trying to make this day special for you, Twilight said, as she swept an appreciative gaze all around her. I can see why you like living here.
Well, shucks, Sugar Cube. You sound like it's all new to you. You've been here almost a year,
Applejack responded, giving her companion a sidelong glance. I know. It's just that this place continues to surprise me, like Canterlot used to.
Twilight hunched her shoulders together and scrunched her face up in a playful smile. In different ways, of course, but just as much. When they arrived at Carousel Boutique moments later, Rarity met them at the door and ushered them in. Applejack, I trust your day is going according to plan.
Yep. Last couple of things to wrap up before I head over to meet the family,
she answered, tipping the brim of her hat. Excellent, and hello to you as well, Twilight, Rarity added as she gave her head a little bow. Superb weather you have for this today, but I suppose we have Rainbow Dash to thank for that, she said, while guiding them to the back room. Applejack and Twilight set their saddlebags down and took the pair of seats that Rarity indicated.
Ever upon his being so helpful again. This'll go off without a hitch,
Applejack said.
Thank you so much, Rarity. You got the know-how on this part. The only thing is, I'll have to owe you. I'm down in my last bit for the week.
She hung her head, rolling her eyes up at Rarity. Perish the thought! Rarity blurted out, holding an indignant hoof to her chest. Seriously, Applejack, do you think I would charge you for such a thing? Goodness, no! Now, show me what you brought. She leaned forward, a creative spark igniting in her eyes.
The flowers there are my saddlebag,
Applejack stated, while pointing a hoof at the clump of blossoms.
Apple Bloom helped me cut 'em, and she did the arrangement all by herself,
she added, as she closed her eyes and snapped a nod. Rarity levitated the vase out of the saddlebag and set it on a nearby table. It was made of clear, leaded crystal, with a wide, square bottom that tapered to a narrow neck before flaring into a final bell shape at the top. Rarity held a hoof to her chin as she frowned and traversed her gaze up and down the vase a few times. My, she does have talent, doesn't she? All in good time. After tapping a hoof on the floor for a moment, her eyes lit up and she cracked a satisfied smile. Blue and pink flowers, I suppose the pink ones are you and Apple Bloom, and the blue ones are Big Macintosh. Getting a nod in return, Rarity continued, I think this is one of those times when less is more. I'll just be a minute. She trotted over to an impressive assortment of coloured ribbons on a rack of spools.
You know, Twilight,
Applejack said as she leaned towards her.
Rarity's the only one of our little group who's actually met my mom.
She added a punctuating nod. Really? Answered Twilight, her brow creased. I'm the only one who's particularly new.
Well, only Rarity's lived here long. The rest moved in later.
A nostalgic look came over Applejack's eyes as she began to chuckle again.
You see, Rarity's kinda responsible for how I wear my mane and tail.
Seeing Twilight's astonished gape, Applejack decided that she'd better elaborate.
At about the age when I was allowed to start helping out around the farm, I got it into my head that my mane and tail were going to keep getting in the way. I asked Mom to cut them short for me, but she said they were pretty just how they were. Now, pretty's never meant much to me, so I went off to the barn, got the garden shears, and did the job myself. Mom laughed and cried a bit too when she saw, but she said I had to be happy in my own skin, and if that's what I wanted, then so be it. Next day at school, Rarity, now we were in different classes, but I saw her on the playground a lot, nearly fainted at the sight. She lectured me up one side and down t'other about proper personal grooming and a bunch of other big words that no fella that age should know.
Twilight's smile had grown throughout the story, and by now she was working hard at suppressing the urge to giggle. Rarity strolled back over and placed a pair of ribbons next to the vase. Oh, that old story! Yes, I let your mother have an earful too. As Twilight erupted into laughter, Rarity returned to her work area to select yet another colour.
She told Mom that once everything grew back out, I was not to show my face at school again in such a state. When they finally did grow out again,
Applejack continued in spurts through her snickering,
Rarity showed me how to tie them up and out of the way. Mom said she liked it better because I had her colour and that I should be proud of it.
Their grins quickly turned to open-mouthed shock as Rarity's voice cut across the room in an uncharacteristic choice of language. Applejack! Get your flank over here! When Rarity saw the reaction she had gotten, she blushed a deep crimson. She shook off her embarrassment and stamped a hoof. I meant that literally! I need to match your ribbon colour to your cutie mark. I've got good shades of apple green and gold picked out, but I need to compare my reds. Applejack obliged, and Rarity held several strands of ribbon up to her side, finally settling on the darkest example. Carrying it over to the previous two, she glued each down onto a wider lace backing, and then tied them around the vase's neck, intertwining all three into a single complex bow that showed off each hue. There! I think that's all that needs to be said. Colours of different apple varieties. After staring at the accent for a moment, Applejack at last said in a small voice,
It's just right. It gets the point with a minimum of fuss. Thank you, Rarity.
Rarity levitated the vase back into Applejack's saddlebag gingerly, then made a shooing motion towards the door. Now go on, you still have some cooking to do. Once Applejack had snapped back to the present, she nodded, picked up her saddlebag, and led Twilight out the door. Applejack trotted down the street at an easy gait, but her smile faded when she glanced idly up at the clock, showing through a shop's window.
Running a mile behind. I was due with Pinkies 10 minutes ago.
It'll be fine, Twilight said. You've got me to help you cook. Applejack took a deep breath and nodded, allowing her shoulders to slouch a bit. They reached Sugar Cube Corner half a block further, only to find the counter unattended.
Pinky!
Applejack called.
You here?
In the back!
Sang a lyrical voice from the kitchen.
Come on in!
Applejack and Twilight walked around the display cases and through the doorway. Pinky sat there, casting a watchful eye over a full bank of ovens.
Wow, y'all are busy today,
Applejack remarked.
Of course, silly Philly.
Shrilled Pinky.
We got so many orders for Mother's Day cakes that every oven is going. Except one. I always keep one open for you. I made a pinky promise.
She whipped her head around to see if there were any unauthorized witnesses to her pledge.
Well, I'll get right to it then. Thanks, Pinky.
Applejack took the produce from Twilight's pack and began slicing squash.
Y'all can help if you like, Twilight.
She motioned towards a cutlery block.
Knives are over there. I want to cut up the squash, zucchini, and eggplant, and alternate slices in the casserole dish.
She looked right and left, then said,
Oh, it's still in my bag.
Twilight levitated the dish out, setting it on the counter and taking the zucchini. Mere seconds later, she said, Done! What else can I do? Still only halfway through her first squash, Applejack gaped at the neatly filed entree. Oh, I hope you don't mind that I use magic, Twilight said, her head hanging. Getting a wordless headshake in response, she brightened up and levitated the remaining half of Applejack's squash, popping it apart into precise slices before shuffling them into the mix.
Now that's a neat trick,
Applejack mused.
Let's see what y'all can do with the tomatoes. I need 'em smashed.
She punched at the air for emphasis, then grabbed a vine with her mouth and tossed it into the air. It immediately exploded in a shower of red droplets. Wincing from the anticipated impact, Applejack opened one eye cautiously and saw chunks of the fruit hanging in midair before swirling down to collect in a mixing bowl.
Last bit,
she said, while pointing at the bag of herbs and wearing an excited grin. A host of aromatic leaves flew out of their individual pouches and shredded themselves over the bowl, followed by a blob of crushed garlic.
Wow, is that what it's like at the library?
Applejack asked as she took a wooden spoon and stirred the vinegar and oil in. No, Spike usually won't let me in the kitchen. He thinks everything should be done the long way. Twilight drew her eyebrows together into a scowl and made her voice as masculine as possible.
If you take shortcuts, it'll show up in the flavor. Nothing tastes better than an honest effort.
Her concentration waning, she broke into a fit of giggles. While she poured the bowl's contents over the casserole, Applejack shook her head and smiled.
He's good, though. Gotta give him that. Makes me wonder what his cutie mark would be, if he could get one.
She scattered the spinach and mushrooms throughout the dish, then balanced the block of cheese on her hoof.
One more for good measure?
Twilight gave a quick nod and closed her eyes. Soon after, a blanket of precisely measured Romaneo matchsticks floated down to coat the casserole.
And now, we wait,
stated Applejack, as she slid the dish into the oven and set the timer for an hour.
Thank you, Twilight. You saved me a lot of time.
She leaned back against the counter, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. enjoying the chance to relax for a moment. Around her, a pink blur of activity continually shifted dough to ovens, hot pans to work tables, and ornate confections to boxes, punctuated with the occasional "oops" or
Excuse me?
Applejack drew herself a glass of water from the faucet and drank it down. Taking the opportunity of a break in the action to cross Pinky's patrol route, she joined Twilight at an out-of-the-way table.
I remember the first thing I ever cooked for Mom. I mixed up some peanut butter, marshmallows, and jelly beans and threw it in a pan. I got it all lopsided and lay on the edge of the oven. Half was burnt to a crisp and half was barely melted.
Twilight held a hoof to her face as she snorted.
I carried it in her and couldn't have been more proud. She took one bite and chewed and chewed and chewed.
Laughing enough that she had to speak in fits and starts, Applejack did her best to continue.
I went to get her a drink, and when I got back, it was gone. She told me it was good. When I washed the pan, I picked a bit off and it had a taste. Sweet Celestia, it was bad. I figured she must have just had a taste for it, though.
Suddenly, she pitched forward and buried her head in her hooves. When she looked back up, she had tears streaming down her bright red cheeks and was shaking with peals of laughter.
The next week,
She managed to wedge between her guffaws.
I thought she liked it so much, I cooked it for her again. The look on her face!
A metal cake pan clattered to the floor behind them as Pinky burst out laughing and had to hold on to Twilight's chair to stay upright. Once all three had recovered, Applejack wiped her tears away and added,
Big Mayak had a nice little talk with me that night and convinced me to stick with the recipe books until I had some experience.
Oh, that gives me an idea,
Pinky said.
Peanut jelly mallow? Something.
She held a hoof to her chin and rolled her eyes upward. The heavenly scent of baked squash had gradually made its presence known throughout the dominant cake and frosting odour, and Twilight closed her eyes as she inhaled deeply. That smells great. I can't wait to try it. Pinky's thoughtful expression abruptly melted away, her mouth gaping open as she fought for something to say.
I suppose that'd be okay.
Applejack stammered through her suddenly weak smile.
The Apple family's never one to turn away a guest.
Psst! Twilight looked up at Pinky, who was waving her hoof towards the far corner of the room. Her stern look said in plain language that attendance was not optional. When Twilight arrived for their private conference, Pinky put her mouth up to Twilight's ear. Yes, Pinky, but what's wrong with that? Commented Twilight. Huh? No, I don't... Oh. You're right. Her face having fallen, Twilight took several hesitant steps back towards Applejack. Thank you for the kind offer, Applejack, but this really is something that ought to be a family affair. I should be getting back to the library anyhow. I know she's not my mother, but I'd like to send a letter to Princess Celestia. Is there anything else I can do to help?
Well, you've already done so much, Sugar Cube,
Applejack said as she got to her hooves and hugged Twilight. I know, Twilight replied, her eyes cast downward. But every pony else gave you gifts that were unique, something that only they could have given you. A spark flashed in her thoughts as a sly smile stretched across her face. Her horn glowed for a moment, and then she looked back up into her friend's eyes. There, that should do it. She nuzzled Applejack's neck before heading for the door. I'll see you around, AJ.
But what did you do?
Asked Applejack. You'll see, Twilight answered, without looking back. Applejack arrived at her usual spot early, thanks to Twilight's help. She slouched her way out from under her saddlebags and sat under the broad canopy of an elm. The sun still had an hour or so of arc left to it, but one strategically placed cloud shielded her eyes from its harsh glare. As she took in the familiar view of gently rolling hills spread out before her, two wrens in the branches above chattered a melodic exchange. Drawing a deep breath, she closed her eyes and let her mind go blank until she heard her family's voices and Winona's barking approaching. Howdy, y'all. Good timing. I finished a mite early, 'cause Twilight lent me a hoof. Applejack rose and pricked her ears towards her brother. You bring everything?
Yep.
Said Big Macintosh as he lifted the flap to one of his saddlebags and pulled out a stack of dishes. The other emitted an appetizing scent of freshly baked apple tarts.
We followed Granny's recipe, as usual.
He added, smiling at the old mare. Applejack helped him unfold the large quilt and arrange plates around the edge, then placed the vase of flowers in the centre. Every pony sends their regards, Applejack said, wearing an enormous grin on her face. I already decorated the vase. Pinkie let me use the Kite's kitchen. Dayesh gave us a clear sky with a touch of shade, and Fluttershy provided the music, she added, pointing to their feathered entertainers. She creased her brow and scratched her hoof at her head. Twilight helped cook, and she said she wanted to do something else special. Didn't say what. She retrieved the casserole dish from her saddlebag and removed the cover, sending a cloud of steam skyward, then broke the baguette into several pieces. Dig in, every pony. While Big Mac served up a helping to Apple Bloom, Applejack tore the foil from the sparkling grape juice. She tugged at the cork a few times, and when she felt it starting to back out on its own, heads up! Every pony hunched down while grimacing and keeping one eye on the bottle. With a loud pop, the cork launched impossibly high, streaking well above their shady tree while trailing purple sparks. At the apex of its trajectory, it exploded into a mass of red pieces, each one spouting streams of glowing red light that coalesced into a giant heart, which hung, shimmering, for several minutes before finally dying out. Every pony gaped at the spectacle and stomped their applause once it had ended.
Now that's how you pop a cork,
Apple Bloom commented. Applejack's gaze remained fixed on the sky long after the last tendrils of red glitter had dissipated. Thanks, Twi, she whispered as she blinked away a few impending tears.
AJ,
Big Mac said to break her trance.
every pony's been served but you. Here's your plate.
He wore a gentle smile as he set it down in front of her. Once she had poured a glass of juice for each of them, Applejack took a big bite of eggplant and swiped a chunk of bread through the tomato sauce. Now, y'all know the drill. All of the youngest generation ponies got to share a mom story. You first, Big Mac. He pondered his choice for a moment while chewing a mouthful of squash. Then his eyes lit up and his ears perked as he settled on a memory.
AJ must have been about 5 years old. She'd been roughhousing through the yard all morning, but it started raining, so she came inside. On about her 10th lap around the couch, she knocked over the lamp. Y'all know the one, the brown ceramic lamp with the blue stripe around it. Anyhow, it hit the floor, and she put it back up on the table. She was so scared. After looking it over, she found a chip out of the side and started bawling her eyes out.
Applejack hid her eyes with a foreleg as she blushed, but motioned for him to continue.
I tried to tell her it was okay, but she ran off to tell Mom all about it. Mom could barely understand her, but she was shaking and crying so hard. But when it was over, Mom hugged her and said, "Honest little Applejack, you did the right thing, and no harm done. Now, run along and play." What AJ didn't know was that I probably knocked that same lamp over a dozen times when I was small. The chip was already there, and the whole thing must have been glued back together 2 or 3 times.
Applejack gave Big Mac a playful smack on the back of his neck and crossed her hooves. When were you going to tell me that? I still feel guilty when I remember that. She shoved him and shook her head, smiling despite herself. I suppose it's my turn. Let's see. A hoof tapped a few times on her chin before her eyes danced at the scene playing in her head. Mom took me to my first rodeo when I was 6. She won a few trophies and a mess of ribbons. She also convinced me to enter the junior competition. When I got out in the ring, the bright lights blinded me, and I missed the first few targets in the lasso event. Mom could see me squinting, so she came out and gave me her hat. Reaching up a tentative hoof to her headwear, Applejack ran it along the brim. I placed 4th and got my first ever ribbon. I felt so bad, like I'd let Mom down. After the competition, I went over to Mom to give her a hat back. She said, "Why so glum, AJ? Do you realize that every other pony there was at least a year older than you? I'm so proud of you. That's in your hat now. You started out in a new journey today, and it'll see you through to the end. You keep that until you're ready to hang it up for good or pass it along to a little cowpoke of your own. This hat's seen me through a lot, and it makes me mighty proud to wear it." Applejack stared at the centerpiece of flowers for a moment before collecting her thoughts and turning her gaze on her sister. "How about you, Apple Bloom? What story do you like to tell?" Apple Bloom looked at the ground with a fretful expression for a moment, before smiling and saying,
I'd like to tell one about Granny Smith, 'cause she's a mom too.
"Well now, I think that's mighty fine of you," remarked Applejack. "You go on when you're ready then."
A few years ago, I wanted to help out for my first apple book season. I caved every tree I could, but I got nothing. Trunk after trunk until my legs ached, but I never got a single apple. Granny Smith found me in the barn crying, and she took me around the back of the house, where one little tree was growing. She said, "I planted this tree the day you were born. Just like you, it's grown strong and healthy. It may be small, but it's ready to do its part. Go ahead, give it a whack." I knew I couldn't hit a tree that had size with a full kick, so I gave it a nice, small jolt. There were only 4 apples on the whole thing, but they all came tumbling off. Granny said, "Eat one. Sometimes the smallest trees make the sweetest apples." And she was right. It was one of the juiciest I'd ever eaten.
Apple Bloom held up her head high as she chewed with renewed vigor at another bite of casserole. As Applejack finished her meal, she dabbed up the last bits of sauce with the baguette end piece that she tossed to Winona, who caught it with practiced ease. Applejack lay back and counted the first few stars able to pierce their way through the waning sunlight. Without averting her gaze from the sky, she took the apple tart that Big Mac offered her and munched on it. Letting her eyes drift closed, she smiled at the sounds filling her ears, animated conversation and melodious wren calls. She finally sat up and eyed the sun's progress over the horizon. "Y'all better wrap things up if you're going to get home before dark," she observed. Big Mac nodded his assent, so Applejack helped him pack up all the dishes into his saddlebags. The picnic's 2 honorees had remained silent throughout the entire meal, but Granny Smith finally overcame her emotions enough to speak.
That was right sweet of y'all. I appreciate all the work you put into it, AJ,"
she said, giving Applejack a hug.
"See you at home."
"All right, Granny," Applejack replied, waving to her family. "Y'all run along now." Apple Bloom stopped in mid-stride and raised an eyebrow.
You're not coming with us?
Later.
Big Mac answered.
Sis needs some time alone with Mom.
He put a hoof on her shoulder to nudge her forward. After one final wave, Applejack waited for her dinner guests to disappear over the nearest hilltop. She glanced into the branches overhead. "You too. Thanks, y'all. Head on home to your families." A pair of wrens nodded and flitted away. As Applejack watched them go, the fading daylight turned to purple dusk, and the first few bats weaved their way through clouds of gnats. Applejack moved the flowers off the quilt, which she folded and placed in her saddlebag, where it lay on the ground. She then took the vase and set it in front of her mother's headstone, steadying it against any wind with a trio of rocks. Finally, she sat in the grass and removed her hat, holding it against her chest. "Hi, Mom," she said, letting her eyes trace the contours of the cheery bouquet. I know I don't visit as much as I should, but as you can see, we're still keeping up the tradition. Apple Bloom's getting so big, she'll get her cutie mark any time now. A little gentle pressure, that's all I give her, but I can't do it as well as you did. She gave a small laugh and ran her hoof over the inscription she had committed to memory so long ago. Big Mayak still does a great job with the farm. No need to worry about that. Everything's running smooth, and we're raking in enough bits to do well for ourselves. Leaning forward, she closed her eyes and took a deep sniff of the hyacinths. I'll keep your flower beds up. They're still so beautiful, and I still wear my mane and tie alone, just the way you liked them. Winona's as crazy as she's always been, and Granny hasn't slowed down a bit. We're happy. We really are. It feels like there's always that piece missing. As her resolve finally broke, Applejack wiped a few beads of moisture from her cheeks. I miss you, Mom. I miss... She shook her head, chuckling and smiling through her tears. Look at me, grown mare and carrying on like a foal. Rubbing her nose and sniffling, she opened her eyes again and brushed at the teardrops on the grass, glistening with the rising moon. Every pony helped. Same one I told you about before, but there's a new one this year. I've probably mentioned her to you. Name's Twilight Sparkle. You'd like her. Friendly and practical, if a bit on the obsessive side. She gave us the light show earlier, Applejack said as she waved a hoof at the sky. More and more stars winked on in the evening light as fireflies answered below. Looks like Luna's giving you one too. Applejack pursed her lips for a moment and looked to the side, her ears drooping. It's getting late, and I should be going soon. Wish I could visit every day, but you know how the farm goes. Thing is, I don't want to turn my back on you and leave. It feels wrong. I don't ever want to leave you behind. You know, Her face breaking into a grimace, she didn't bother to wipe her cheeks dry anymore. I have trouble remembering your face now. I'd heard that happened, and I didn't believe it. But now I have to look at photographs sometimes. Applejack swallowed hard and tapped her hat against her chest a few times. I'll keep you in here. That's never gonna change. I love you, Mom. Her mouth hung open as she attempted to vocalize a swirl of incoherent thoughts. But in the end, she settled for patting her hoof on the stone marker. She returned her hat to its perch, stood up, sniffled one last time, and slung her saddlebags over her back. As she finally trudged away into the darkness, she took a deep breath. A small glint returned to her eyes. She called back over her shoulder, I didn't forget about you, Dad. It's only another month till Father's Day. That was But You Surpass Them All. It was written by Pascoite and read by Scribbler. Okay, thank you very much for listening to that one. That one is a bit significant to me, although I didn't realise quite how much so when I first started. There are a lot of fanfictions out there that deal with the Apple family and the Apple parents in particular, and I must admit I've done probably more than my fair share of stories dealing with them, and comics dealing with them, for those who only know me from the core of the Apple series. But this one in particular struck a chord, and those who have been hanging about my channel for a while will know this, that my mother had a heart attack a few months ago, and had another one fairly recently that I didn't really publicise. So this fic in particular resonates with me because of that. So whether or not anybody else takes a personal thing away from it, whatever that might be, a message, a feeling, a desire to go and hug your mum, or whether or not they're just here for the ponies, I hope you enjoyed that, because I have no more explanation than that. Right, okay, moving on to something a little more cheerful. I am reopening auditions, and I'm going to be emailing some people, but I'm also reopening blanket auditions for Heroic Tale of Heroically Heroic Heroes, my radio play, that while I was away, I have been writing the script, and there are now 10 male characters available that were not available previously. And, in fact, no, there's 12 male characters that were previously unavailable. One before was just called Goat Village, and now he has a name. And 2 female characters, if anybody would like to try out for those. So, things continue on a pace with that one. First episode is very nearly edited and done. We are marching ahead with that one, just waiting for some artwork and things. And that should be landing on my YouTube channel fairly soon. So, keep your eyes peeled for that one. In other news, I got given some unexpected fan art, which I'm going to put on the screen now. This is from Mikey. Now, this is interesting for me to try and pronounce. Mikey's from Sweden, and I'm not sure if you pronounce the J as a J or as a Y sound in Sweden, so it's either Mikey Rayson or Mikey Regson. So I apologise profusely for whichever one of those is the mispronunciation, but isn't she sweet? It's my ponysona. Right, thank you. I was just so chuffed when I received this, because I was not expecting it, and that's always a nice thing. In the meantime, fic suggestions, as always, to me via YouTube, via PM, via email on my fanfiction channel, where I'm known as obabscribbler, or my fanfiction.net channel, for those of you who read the blurb below these emails and have actually gone to check that out. Thank you very much. It was very gratifying that my entire fanish career prior to ponies got some acknowledgement. And other than that, take care of yourselves, everybody. Go and hug your loved ones. Be lovely to each other, and good night, everybody.